A special thanks to my Patreon supporters. Native Americans of Reddit, what are your or your tribe's ghost stories, legends, or supernatural occurrences? Mexican here. We were tribesmen too, we just built a bit of an empire, so I'll tell you the story of the Shinek. These creeps are young children with the faces of old men and not much is known about them. They live in the deserts and jungles of Mexico and the legend goes that if you see one and follow it, you'll lose either 3 or 7 days. My grandfather always told me that if you lose 7 days to a Shinek, they follow you home and they try their absolute best to drive you to insanity, depression, or suicide. If you lose 3 days, it means one of 2 things will happen. The first is that you'll go to war where you will die a brutal but glorious death. The second is that you will be the victim of great tragedy. Lose your life savings, break both legs, lose family. That sort of thing. If you turn your back on the Shinek, it will transform into a great and terrible jaguar and you'll be devoured. To avoid this fate, you must back away from it, avoiding eye contact at all costs, for if you make eye contact, it will steal your soul. When you can no longer see it, you must pray and pray hard. I'm not quite sure how well this monster is known throughout Mexico or if it's even told the same. But I know that this story has been in my family for generations. My grandfather's grandfather told him. My father's grandfather told him. My grandfather told me. My father will tell my son. And I'll tell my grandson. Yes, in that order. Old traditions. I pray we never see one of these monsters. My tribe talks about a beast called, rough translation here, the Flame Walker. Spirits who take the form of a small blue flame, that leads people into the swamps and bogs, where they eventually drown or otherwise vanish. Yes, they are basically will-o-wisps. Another are the water-faced hunters, again rough translation, and I am not heavily involved with my tribe these days. These creatures have a face that acts like a pool of water, reflecting the face of anyone who looks them in the eyes. They mercilessly hunt down the people who acknowledge them. The only way to avoid them is to not speak to, or others interact with a stranger unless you can see their face from the corner of your eye. We also have the more traditional skinwalker type legends, as well the bogmen. My tribe is considered part of the Abenaki, but are actually a smaller, sub-tribe. Basically when it came down to it, there were not enough of the tribe to actually be considered a tribe anymore. Today we number fewer than 200, and only 8 of those are more than half-blooded. My bio father and his brother, as well as my paternal grandparents are the last 4 full-blooded of my tribe. I'm Anishinaabe, Ojibwe/Chippewa. When I was young, my mom would tell me and my siblings stories. One of them was about twisted, spiteful people who were knowledgeable about medicine, spiritual power, but that they used it in a bad way. It was said that such people could turn into bears, shape-shifters. We called them bear walkers, and they moved only at night. Weird Wolf Guy mentioned will-o-wisps, and his story is similar to mine. We were taught that these balls of light were the sign of a bear walker. And that if we saw one, we were supposed to run away, as fast as we could. Recent story my friend told me was about 2 of his cousins whom were raised by their grandmother and she would take off in the night around 10 when she would put them to sleep. Well, one night they decided pretend to be asleep to stay up to see what the grandma was doing at that time of night, and turns out she would go to the shed for an hour and come out with her whole body covered in paint while the top of her head and torso were covered in animal skin. They were shocked because she was the typical kind grandma who was always dressed nice and had her hair fixed in a bun. She took off into the darkness of the woods. Later coming back before dawn with her hair all messy with leaves in it and blood on her skin. She would go back into the shed and clean herself up and go make breakfast for them. Like it was totally normal. Goes to show you how you may never truly know someone. Dean from northern British Columbia here. My mom used to always tell me stories of the Negani, or bushmen/wild men when I was young. They were people who lived in the forest and took away people who wandered too far out, specifically children. I always figured these stories were created by my people to serve two purposes: first to teach young children to not wander far off, and second to give explanations to kidnappings done by other tribes, which was a fairly common occurrence even up until the early to mid-20th century. My grandmother's brother was taken by Cree from Alberta and raised by them. They had assumed he had died until decades later when they were reunited and learned what had happened. La Llorona. In a variation of the tale, she was a beautiful woman married to an unfaithful, very rich man. When she found out he was cheating on her, she went crazy with jealousy, so she tried to hurt him in the worst way possible. She murdered their children. Once they were dead, she realized the terrible deed she had done and then killed herself. Because she killed her own kids, she was denied a place in the afterlife, so she comes back and tries to take children to take the place of her own kids. When we were kids, we certainly never stayed out at night. We ran home as soon as the street lamps were lit. I've heard a variation in which she drowned her children in the river and was denied entry into the afterlife until she brought them with her, hence why she searches for children and tries to take them with her. I've also heard a version in which her children went swimming and drowned. She called out, "Children! Children! Come home! It's night time," but nobody came. So she went out, shouting, "Children! Children! Come home! It's night," and became increasingly desperate when her children didn't answer, and she vanished, presumably having died of exposure from searching for them non-stop. And to this day, if children are out after dark, La Llorona might find them and say, "Ah, my child, I have found you," and try to take you away, never to be seen again. In the retelling of the second variation, it mentioned that La Llorona was also a danger to adults, too. If you came across her at night shouting, "Children! Children! Come home! It's night," and approached her, she would ask you, "Have you seen my children?" And if you said, "Yes," she would kill you for lying to her, but if you said, "No," then she would run away shouting. We have a spirit similar in Aboriginal culture. It's called a Mimi spirit. Basically, when you go walk about, this spirit, day or night, will try and trick you into following it. It will appear, you walk to it and it's vanished. It will appear again, you again follow it for it to disappear. Repeat this multiple times and you are lost forever. I was 7 when I first actually met an elder whose son was taken by the Mimi spirit. I'll never forget her broken face when she told my class. Walking Sam skulks in the shadows of the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota and convinces people to commit suicide, especially young people. He's 7 feet tall, very thin, and has no mouth. When he stretches out his long arms, nooses hang down with Lakota children hanging from them. Walking Sam finds you when you're alone and puts thoughts in your head until you feel worthless and kill yourself. Sometimes Walking Sam is depicted looking like Abraham Lincoln, complete with the stovepipe hat. Walking Sam, Uncle Sam, I don't know if that's where the name came from. But Walking Sam is an evil infected upon the people when the Osidi-Sakowin were forced onto the reservations. He isn't a legend of the people before Pine Ridge Reservation existed. Lincoln was president when the Lakota were being forced onto reservations. Lincoln also ordered the execution of 38 Lakota men the day after Christmas in 1862. It's the largest mass execution in U.S. history. I always thought Walking Sam was Lincoln. They carved his face onto Sauk P. Tuenkaengsi in the Paha Sapa. Mount Rushmore was 6 grandfathers in the Black Hills. My father attended Holy Rosary boarding school at Pine Ridge in the 1940s and 1950s, but our people didn't live on the reservation. My grandmother said evil stalked the people there. My father never wanted us to ever even visit any of our cousins or his uncles there. First of all, I live in rural Mexico. There are many, many different people. The ones who settled here are descendant from the Aztec and speak Nahuatl. So that's the people I'll tell you about. One of my favorites is the Nahual. Some people were thought to be able to turn into an animal. Most of them could only turn into one, but the most powerful could turn into different animals. There was a man who owned an hacienda where my town is, and he had a sort of overseer that everyone was afraid of. Said overseer could take a message all the way to the next state, think hundreds of miles, and bring back a sealed response in a day. He also seemed to know everything everyone did, all the time. He was rumored to be a narwhal that could turn into a coyote. His quarters were heavily warded in his absence, which only added fuel to the rumor, for you can only kill a narwhal if you find the human skin he sheds to transform, and burn said skin. Edited to add, legend because I'm stupid and hit send before I finished typing it. Also this took place in the early 1900s. Not me, but my fiancée is 50% native. She said that when she was a kid her mom, who lived and associated with their tribe frequently, was told to take her and her siblings to the storm shelter and to lock the doors because the owls were coming. In her tribe it is believed that owls were possessed by unkind spirits and would come back to haunt people who had harmed them during their life. Her mom, who was just a child then, had followed her parents' orders and had taken her and her siblings to the shelter, but she hadn't locked the door. She opened the door and above her she saw a swarm of owls flying over her and the other nearby homes that also housed other people of the tribe. She said they all flew past the nearby homes and never saw the occurrence happen again, but until this day her mom gets nervous and uneasy when she sees an owl. I'm too late but worth a shot. Do Inuit count? I'm from the northern Canada, Nunavut. There are shadow figures called Taranak or the shadow people. It is believed that you can see them from the corner of your eyesight. When you see a Taranak, you would take another look or you swore you saw something in a form of shadow or a haze. I have heard that they are rather creepy and they give you the feeling of being watched or a slight anxious of some is following you. Another legend is called Ijirate, translated, people who hide. Ijirate are entities that you would see in the barren Arctic in the far hills. The Ijirate have the power to shape-shift into other creatures or people, really similar to the Navajo legend Skinwalker, although never harming Inuit. It is believed that the entities observes Inuit and follow them, but I have never heard Ijirate harming Inuit. An Inuk elder explained that the Ijirate can live human lives or imitating humans, or even marry other human beings, while pretending to be Inuit. Camping in the Arctic is creepy and you would have that expectation that you would encounter entities, especially how the Arctic is so vast and empty. I'm half and half Apache and half Cherokee. I know plenty of lore, but I have a story about coyotes and shape-shifting that I personally experienced if anybody is interested in hearing it. Edit, alright, it's maybe not the most exciting but here it is. I was living on the res and I was way out in the middle of nowhere, even in res standards. It was nighttime and I was watching the full moon outside. I remember it was so beautifully bright that I could see almost everything. It wasn't uncommon to hear coyotes around here, though you saw them less than you heard them. In spite of this, I saw a few coyotes trotting off a little ways in an opening bathed in the full moon. I remember thinking that they must be up to no good, because coyote is rarely up to any good. Oddly, I didn't hear them, even though coyotes are louder and more talkative when traveling at night. Well, I was gazing out the window near our front door, when I heard my mother calling me from outside. I specifically remember that she said I had left my backpack in the car and needed to get it to do my homework. I thought nothing of it and began to put on my shoes. Suddenly, every hair on my body stood straight up. The air seemed wrong. It was at this time that my mother walked in from the kitchen and said that dinner was almost ready and I needed to wash up. She saw my shoes on, and immediately sensed something wasn't right. She asked if somebody was outside. I said she was. Of course, no she wasn't. She had been in the kitchen the whole time. I took a last look out the window facing the open field, and I saw a coyote waiting in the light of the full moon. It then stood up on its hind legs like a person and walked into the woods. I would stake my life on this story's authenticity. This is also not the only story I have of my parents' voices speaking to me while I'm alone. I come from the Lumbee tribe, which has a lot of controversy to begin with, but I'll share a family story. My great-grandmother was supposedly the local witch doctor in her town for a majority of her life. Growing up, I always thought these sorta stories were total bullshit and just my dad messing with me. He and his family would always say how I was her namesake, and even if I didn't want to accept it, we had some weird synchronicities in our family and assumed it was because of her. The day she passed away, my dad was out in his garden when he immediately stood up and thought he heard her screaming from afar. At the time, he lived in a separate state from her, but the screaming sounded like her voice and it really freaked him out. He goes inside the house to call and check on her when suddenly the phone rings. It's his mother telling him how his grandmother had just passed away and he needs to head home. Another weird thing in our family is that whenever I have a dream with my dad in it, even if he only appears for a brief second, without failure he calls me the next day. Every goddamn time this man is in my dreams, I wake up and know that he'll be calling me sometime that day. Best part? He says the same things happens when I appear in his dreams. Him and I aren't terribly close in the sense that I haven't seen him in person in 2 years and we maybe chat on the phone once a month or so. Granted, it's nothing too spooky, but I always found it really interesting that his family and I have these minor happenings and we usually just chalk it up to being Lumbee. Navajo here. Now that I think about it, I haven't heard that many stories. Like it's been said, we don't talk about it. It's a way to avoid them crossing your path. But I do have a story from my grandmother, who helped my grandfather with medicine men practices. So she knew a lot of Navajos in the city. We don't live on the res, and there was one lady that she refused to talk to. Even now, she gets angry about sharing any connection to their family and her grandchildren. From what I was told, she could travel faster than what should be possible, and could travel what would be 8 hours to about an hour. She also didn't seem to age. Her sister also warned other natives about her, and not to converse with her as she could witch them with disease and misfortune. I've always heard that they're like a mafia, and that if you aren't part of them then you wouldn't know what they do. But pretty much nothing good can come with an encounter with one of them. Seneca/Hadenosani here. Someone posted a few rules, which I've been taught as well. Funerals are kinda scary to me. You're not supposed to go outside, or travel alone, you invite spirits to come with. My grandfather and uncles used to carve false faces too. We have the typical, flying heads, little people which are supposed to be kinda good emo, giant snakes, witches, etc. Most stores we don't actually talk about. The scariest one I've heard so far is the combination of shapeshifters/witches. Pronounced Guhene, these things are evil spirits that roam a specific hill near our res. It's creepy as shit, and fills with fog at night, and it's unsettling. I did some research as I was trying to write a script about it, and I found a description of them. They transform into walking disemboweled animals that chase you. I think if anyone was in that area and saw a deer gutted walking in 2 legs towards them, they'd shit their pants. I know I would. I'm only part Native American, but mostly grew up as a white kid in a white family in rural central Texas. Local legends seem to be a blend of Native American, Hispanic, and white American, and I think they're super interesting. The legends aren't told as much anymore. Only older folk talk about them and no children remember them anymore. I fear they're dying, so here they are. The Duke and Duchess of Harvest are a pair of spirits who protect crops from damage. They're benevolent spirits who do their best to help everybody, but can't always do it all, so you have to do your part in protecting your own crops and helping out your neighbors too so they can help others in greater need. They're honored at the yearly Harvest Festival, with a Duke and Duchess being named from each grade at the local elementary school. The Snatcher, or El Tomador, is an evil spirit who snatches away children and animals that wander too far from their parents. No one has ever seen it. The old spirits are a poorly defined group of neutral spirits that just sort of wander around at night. They're the guardians of nature at night, humans get the daytime, the old spirits get the nighttime. Their disapproving looks if you're out during darkness give you uneasy feelings. The pumpkin men are human bodies with pumpkin heads that wander vegetable patches at night and either protect the garden or spread disease in them, depending on who you talk to. El Chupacabra exists in many cultures. I don't think there's a big need to talk about it here. This is all I can think of right now. Absolute here. I see a lot of other tribes with similar stories regarding little people and Bigfoot. We also have a local legend of the Goat Man. From what I know, this particular spirit/demon/creature has only been a recent phenomenon. Maybe started to appear in the last 20 years. Anyway, there is man who has the upper body of an adult male, but the lower body of a goat. He likes to hitchhike and get in vehicles and tries to steal children. A lot of sightings near the Lodge Grass/Benteen area and also in the Busby area as well. We also have the story of the witch who lives in the Pryor Mountains south of Billings, who helps you with your life's problems, but first must take a finger as payment. I will ask my Kale, grandmother, for more. A Lakota story is the man with no face, he's like a boogeyman. The story goes that long time ago in a village, there was this very handsome young man. Many girls from different tribes wanted to be with him, and because of that he grew up to be very obnoxious. He became so ignorant that he would make fun of this old medicine man, calling him ugly whenever he got the chance. One day the old man said, "Before I leave die, I will take your face as my own. You will forever wander looking for it." The young man laughed and called the old man foolish. Within the next few weeks, the old man dies and fulfills his promise. When the young man woke up he couldn't see or anything. When he reaches to feel his face, he feels nothing but smooth skin where his face would be. Yelling but no one hears him, soon the village finds out and chases him off. He now roams the prairie looking for a replacement face. My uncle once told me that he heard this man speak in a ceremony. While it's not good to talk about what goes on in them, I can say this much. The man with no face told everyone that when you're growing up and your parents or grandparents tell you to stay under a meter light or else you're open for him to take you. Also we're told no to whistle at night because it calls spirits. He is one of them and he looks at it as an invite to take your face if it suits him, or he'll take you with him as he does to anyone that breaks these rules. Now I always break the latter rule and take my chances. But never know till it happens to you.